Hey, listen, there's a number of things that my father installed in me when I was a kid that they've had a lasting impact on my life. They're a part of how I think, they're a part of how I feel, they're a part of how I operate, and because of that, they're actually a part of your experience of me. Now, I have my own brain, so I've not adopted every one of his methods or way of thinking, but if you knew him well, and you know me well, you would see his imprint is all over me. For example, for years, and this used to drive me nuts. If we were walking into the house and my father was home and he asked me, hey, how you doing? And I'd say, hey, I'm good. He would interrupt what I said and say, only God is good, right? And it used to drive me crazy. He would do it to us all the time. And where does he get that? Well, he gets it from Matthew chapter 18. The rich young ruler walks up to Jesus and says, hey, good teacher. And Jesus stops him and says, whoa, why do you call me good? Don't you know only God the Father in heaven is good? And so he would torture us and terrorize us with that. And I swore growing up, I will never do that. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? And so, of course, when people say that around me, that's exactly what I do. Drives my kids nuts now. My father, for example, hated to waste food. We had this, if it's on your plate, you're going to eat it rule in our home. I still feel strongly about that. You can ask my kids and interview them if you like. But my father would combine every leftover he could find and make it into a meal. So if you opened the fridge and there was some hot dogs and then a little bit of leftover tomato soup and some peas or something, he would just put it all together and go, it's hot dog soup, right? And we would eat it. And so to this day, and this baffles Emily, I'll rummage through the fridge and cupboards and find a bunch of things and put it all together and I'll have a meal for the kids. And I get that from my father. And because of that, if I buy something or I make something, and I've never had it before, and I take one bite and it's disgusting, I'm eating the whole thing. I can't waste it. There's something in me. And I get that from my father. My father had a cup. It was his cup. And every time he took a drink, it was from that cup. And if any one of us were to touch that cup or mess with that cup, that would be the last drink we ever had. I have a cup now. And I drink all of my water from that cup. And if one of my kids were to touch that cup or drink from that cup and mess with that cup, I would mess with them. And so in many ways, my Papa and I are very different, but in a lot of ways, we are two peas in a pod. And today's text from James chapter 4 was one of his favorite passages, and in there is one of his life verses. And so it's impacted me, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But let's read from James chapter 4 today. Our text, if you have your Bible, starting at verse 13 says this, now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we're going to go to this city or that city, we're going to spend a year there, carry on business, make all kinds of money. Why? You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that's here for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we're going to live, and we're going to do this. But as it is, you boast, you brag, all that kind of boasting is evil. And then anyone who knows, therefore, the good they ought to do and they don't do it, sins. Will you bow your heads and pray with me? Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow, we're going to go to this city, spend a year there, carry on business, make some moolah. Why? You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. And James opens up with something that, if we're being honest, he's speaking directly to every single one of us, because if you're being real, you've got plans and deadlines and to-do lists and chock-filled calendars with things that are going on over the next little while. And James says, let's just hit the pause button on your plans for a second to get some real perspective, some Jesus perspective. Because he says you've got some grandiose ideas and you're making all of these plans, but you are forgetting one thing about tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that, and it's this. He says you don't even have a clue what's going to transpire tomorrow or what might happen today that will drastically alter tomorrow. So it says, you got to think about that. You got to factor that in. I remember my first staff meeting with Mac Burberry. He was the senior pastor at Muhammad Christian Church, and I had just signed on to be the children's pastor there. I was working on my master's at Lincoln Christian, and my friend Barry Friesen come down from Canada to be the worship pastor there, and I think Brian was the name of the youth pastor at the time. It was my very first staff meeting, and Mac Burberry sat us all around, and he says, I've got a homework assignment for you guys. And he says, you got 1 week to do it. You need to complete it by next week's staff meeting. And he said this. He said, I want you to work on this week your 10-year plan. 10-year plan. Like, I was 22. Like, that's the equivalent of half my life. I didn't know what I was going to eat for supper that night. If I could give you a 2-day plan, that would be something, 10 years. And so I'm in my office this week doing some work, and Mac comes running in, and she's grabbing paper. I'm like, sweetheart, what are you doing? She's like, well, Chris, in this wild goose chase thing he's got the students doing, gave us an assignment where we got to come up with a flow chart for the next 5 years of our lives. I'm like, what? 5? And James says, listen, I totally get you want to plan and set things up, get your calendars all filled with the important dates and everything blocked off. But you got to factor one thing into your planning. The way you see tomorrow playing out, chances are it's not going to play out that way at all. Are you chill with that? Can you handle that? Because there's one person who can see into the future. And guess what? It is not you. So Solomon was a guy with plans, right? King Solomon. And not only did he have plans, he had wisdom and the resources and everything to pull his schemes off. Solomon, the man with plans, said it this way, in a heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And in case you didn't get it the first time, he says this in chapter 19, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purposes that prevail. Now listen, James and Solomon are not saying don't ever make plans. That's not what they're saying. That's not the point. It's not saying don't put anything on your calendar, people. They are, however, saying this. James and Solomon are saying this. Don't be surprised when either life or God blows those plans up. In other words, as Holy Spirit, Jesus followers, it's not a bad idea to make a habit to always write your plans in pencil. That way you leave room for God to erase them. I think one of the things I appreciate most about Jesus, as he headed from town to teach about the kingdom, his plans were written in pencil. Read the Gospels. That'll come clear real quick because constantly he's being interrupted or hijacked by name that sick person or short guy in a tree or like depressed person who just lost a child. I mean, the Jesus journey was filled with interruptions. The disciples at first, they didn't get it. I mean, they were annoyed by this aspect of Jesus because they had plans for Jesus. They had big plans, God-sized plans, important plans. Like, think about the trip to Jerusalem in Luke chapter 18 and 19. It's almost comical, right? The disciples think they're marching towards a coronation, and Jesus is going to go to the capital city, and he's going to punt out the Romans, and Jerusalem's going to be free from their oppression, and they're going to set up a throne, and it's going to be awesome. And so they can't wait. They've got all these plans. Jesus knows he's not marching towards a coronation. He's marching towards a cross. Both know where they're going. Both have plans. We're going to the capital, and here's why. Let's look at the difference between how the disciples wanted to go and how the journey actually went. So if I'm the disciples and Jerusalem's way over here, the disciples are like this. We're going to Jerusalem and nothing's going to stop us, right? Read the story. Read the chapters of the trip to Jerusalem. Because Jesus is more like this. He's just kind of walking like, oh, hey, bro, what's up, bro? And he stops to talk to somebody and he's walking around. Oh, my goodness, you need help. Let me fix you up. And he walks a little bit longer. He's like, oh, dude, what are you doing in a tree, man? That's so weird. Let's go get lunch. That's the way. That was the trip. That was how the plans laid out with Jesus. And the disciples were so annoyed. No joke. Luke chapter 18. They're heading towards Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, parents are bringing their kids up to Jesus, right? and they're having them crawl all over Jesus and play with Jesus, and he's doing tickle torture and making fun of them and having a grand old time. And the disciples are like, what are you doing? They get mad at the parents. Like, Jesus doesn't have time for you and your kids. Like, get those kids off of Jesus. And they're trying to shoo the parents away. And Jesus has to rebuke the disciples and says, no, you don't get it at all, because they didn't want the interruption. They had plans, right? So finally, maybe after an hour or two, the kids are gone, the parents are gone, and they're excited because they can get back to the journey, right? And they're heading towards Jericho, and they walk into the city, and as they walk through the gate, there's a beggar sitting in the gate. And the crowds, they've got things to do, important things. Jesus is going to be, and so they're marching towards Jerusalem. And this beggar starts crying out, "Son of David, have mercy on me!" Right? And the crowds, the followers of Jesus, they're just like trying to kick dirt on. Shh. He doesn't have time for you. And what does Jesus do? He hears the cry of the blind beggar, and he's like, "Hey guys, bring that guy over here." And he stops the crowd, and he stops the march, and he stops the journey. He's like, "Hey, bruh, what do you want me to do for you?" Right? And then finally, Jesus heals this guy, and everything's going great. They're going through Jerusalem, and that's when he's walking down this road. He looks up, and there's like a guy in a tree. His name's Jacques, and Jesus is like, "Well, come on down here." He's like, "Guys, this is my man Jacques." And Jacques, "Hey, I don't know what you're doing today, but we're going to have lunch at your house. That's cool with you?" "Yeah, that's cool." "Okay, who's going to get the groceries?" And because there's going to be a big crowd. And so he stops everything to bring this guy down from a tree and have lunch. And the disciples, they didn't get it. They're like blown away by this, because they had plans and they didn't like the interruptions. And the disciples didn't handle it well when God messed with their plans. How do you handle it when God messes with your plans? Because I have to confess to you, I don't always handle the interruptions well. I just don't. Sometimes it's just a day I have planned. I'm going to get up in the morning, and I'm going to wake up, and I'm going to read my Bible, and I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to go lift, and then I'm going to go to my office and work and sit down, do a bunch of writing for hours. Every once in a while, a kid's going to walk in and go, "Hey, Papa, what can we do to make your life easier?" And then I'm going to send them off to do my bidding, and then maybe I'll clean the bathrooms and then sit down with a couple in the church, and then, maybe I'll make a casserole for the kids, and I'll get it all laid out, and then give them a bath and put them to bed, and then go sit in the patio and then watch SWAT at night with Emily. I get it all laid out, right? And I'm so excited about the day. And the first thing I hear from Emily is, I got a Zoom meeting. Can you take this kid to the dentist? I'm like, "Get thee behind me, wife." Like, no, I have plans. It's like literally how it just blows it up. And I'm not good when that happens. I'm not cool with that sometimes. But sometimes it's just like a day that gets blown up. Other times it's bigger stuff. Like going to college, when I was in college, I had a plan. When I was a Kentucky Christian, I was going to go back to Canada after I graduated. And then I was going to plant churches, and I had a plan in place for that, and I had plans for my plans to be able to do that. And I had a strategy. I had these 10 mother churches who were going to kind of be supporters. They're going to give financially and with prayer and through sending workers and missionaries for a period of 5 years till this congregation could exist on its own. And so I'd already reached out to some pastors I knew in Canada who were on board, and their churches were going to be a part of this. Super excited about this church planting thing I was going to do. And then guess what happened? I met Emily. Which is a great thing, by the way. I'm not saying it's not the last two illustrations. Just ignore them. But because of that, she lived here, and so I was living here. And when I got married to her, actually, I was illegal because I had to get my paperwork in order and all that. So the first year, I couldn't even work, and so finally I get that going. But by then, it was things were starting to happen here, and I was like, I'm never going to get back to Canada. There goes those plans. So much for being a Canadian church planter. But I didn't care. Do you know why? Because I had new plans. Like, I had gone and spoken at a retreat called Shout at the Beach, and there was a bunch of high school students there, and I was invited to be the speaker for that. And at Shout at the Beach, there was a Christian band at the time that was an up-and-coming band called Overflow. They had a song, actually, that hit the top song in the Christian charts at the time, and so they were pretty big, and so they did the worship, and I did the speaking, and through the course of the week at Shout at the Beach, when I was we started to become good friends, me and the band, and we had all these conversations, and at the end of the week, like, you know what? We had this awesome idea. We were talking. We think it would be awesome if you went on tour with us. And I was like, what? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And not to sing, but I would be like, I would go and I would speak, and then they would do all the worship, and we'd do this tour, right? And so I was going to be a traveling evangelist. I was so excited. I'm like, thank you. Who wants to plant churches in Canada? Yes, I'm going to be a traveling evangelist. And I contacted CIY Christ and Youth about partnering with them as well, and I was so excited about this. And then what happened? 1 kid, 2 kid, 3 kid, 4 kid, 5 kids, 6 kids, 7 kids, some of them medical issues. Not exactly an ideal situation to be living life on the road. And God blew up those plans. No, he didn't blow them up to make me mad. He didn't blow them up to make me sad. He didn't blow them up just to see, let's see how he handles this one. You see, I had made plans in my heart. That's not a bad thing. But it's the Lord's purpose that would prevail, and God used my family and my kids and the choices that we made as a family to open up doors and start, for example, a foundation called the Wholehearted Foundation. And now I'm on the phone multiple times a week with families who've been thrown into chaos. People like you think about Chris and Steph are going through with Elijah, like families they've had to move into a hospital for sometimes months at a time, and they can't pay bills, and they're balancing work, and how do I get back home, or how do I see this kid, and all the stuff that goes along with that. And some of these people have no hope. They have no church family. They have no support system. And so we get to step in and share the hope of Jesus. Thank you for blowing up my plans. And now I get to be here at a cool church called Journey Church and be in front of you. Here's the question. Are you okay with when God messes with your plans? Back to the text. Verse 14, James says, what is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little bit and then you're gone. It's a sobering thought, right? Real cheery. Because when I was young, when you were young, you felt like you could live forever, right? When I was 20 years old, I felt invincible. Nothing could touch me. I had my whole life in front of me. I'd wake up every morning and I couldn't wait. Who was I going to see? What was I going to do? Who was I going to meet? I couldn't wait to just get up and just charge forward into the day. Now I'm not so young anymore. I'm right smack in the middle of my life. Just right there in the middle, and it's a great life. It's been full of events, and I've made all kinds of memories. There's been heartaches and tough moments, but there's been a lot of great stuff too. But it's weird. I feel like I blinked, and I got here. And what's scary about that is when I think about this, that I've got more of my life now behind me than I have in front of me. And we got here this fast. And when I talk to people that are a couple generations older than me, right, it's crazy. Maybe they're at the stage where the sun is now setting on their life. They all tell the same story. It goes by so fast. Soak up every moment. Love the ones you're with. Don't sweat the small stuff because any day could be your last. What is your life? You are a mist that's here for a moment and then you're gone. That's the context actually for what James says next. So instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. When I kicked off this message, I talked about how my father loved the book of James and how the way he lived out his faith impacted the way I live out mine. And this was one of the passages that very much formed how he sees and lives out his faith, because it didn't matter what I asked my father growing up. Hey, when you come home from work, can we play catch? He'd be like, yeah, Lord willing. What does God have to do? Can we just say yes? Or like, hey, can we have a family bike ride this weekend? And be like, yeah, we can do that if it's the Lord's will. I'm like, okay, it's great. Or can we go visit grandma this summer, take a family trip and go to Nova Scotia? He'd be like, yeah, Lord willing, we could do that. And I never forgot it, because every plan he made in pencil. So if the Lord wanted to erase it, he could, and my father wouldn't get bent out of shape or upset if things didn't work out. Thousands of times I heard my father say those words. And so it's become a part of how I think, and again, what I say now to my kids, Lord willing. Lord willing. Is that baked in to how you plan. And if it's not, imagine what would happen. What would change in your life if you began to think and feel and plan that way, that everything you wanted to do, everything you hoped to do and wished to do, you would drop instantly if God had something else in store for you to do? Soleil struggles immensely with this because she's like me, like she always has. Her and I have this very thing in common where I kind of referenced it earlier. If I'm planning a day out for the family, a birthday celebration, maybe a vacation, and I'm like, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and when we're done that, we're going to do this only for that amount of time, because then we got to go do this. And if something messes with that, right? If someone interrupts that, Emily's like, hey, or life just happens, we can't do that. Like, that's when you're going to see me pout. That's when you're going to see me. I don't grumble very often. I don't whine very often. But when I have a thing planned out and it doesn't show up, that's when I become a lousy human. And I'm just like, oh, this is done. And I get so downcast about it. And I fought that for years, and it still struggles. Slay's the same way. When she was little, if we were taking a trip, I got to the point where if we were going to plan a vacation, I didn't tell her till the morning she woke up. Wouldn't do it. Because she would then, if I told her ahead of time, she would create for herself an expectation. This is how it's going to go. And if it didn't play out that way, there were fits and tears. Now she's learned to manage it a little bit better because she's older, and I'm still trying to manage it. But it's still a struggle. That's why James says your way of thinking is wrong. You make plans and you dream big and you set goals and you brag about them and you get all excited about what you want to do and you're invested in them, and yet you're so inflexible. It's wrong. Because when your plans for you become more important than what God has for you, there's a word in the Bible for that. It's called idolatry. Idolatry is not just having like this metal image we put in front of the fireplace and do this every morning. That's not the only thing idolatry is. It's putting anything we have, anything we do, anyone we know above God, and that goes for our plans. That goes for our plans too. Lord willing, that's the safeguard. Whenever you plan, whatever you plan, Lord willing. Here's what I want, God, but not by will, but yours be done. Invite God to mess with and blow up and replace your plans, because I promise you, He actually knows you better than you know you. You can trust God with your plans. And then James finishes in verse 17 with an interesting spiritual tidbit and truth we don't talk enough about. Anyone then who knows the good they ought to do, but doesn't do it, sins. It's a sin for them. It's interesting because in verse 17, James shifts from the second person plural to the third person singular, which kind of makes it sound almost like a proverb. And there's a good chance as he brings up this sin of omission, he's actually quoting a proverb. Proverbs chapter 3 says this: Do not withhold good. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is your power to act. In other words, if you know the good thing to do, the right thing to do, you've got to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, hey, come back tomorrow, maybe then I'll give it to you, when you already have it with you. And whether he's actually quoting this proverb or not, the message is clear. If you know something is the right thing to do, and you don't do it, you don't do it. Don't have time, too busy, rather not, don't like that person. If you don't do it, that's a sin just like lying or cheating or boasting. In other words, knowing the right thing to do, knowing something is the right thing to do, makes us obligated to do that right thing. Does this make sense? And if we don't, we're held accountable for that. Someone once said this: misdeeds are sins of commission, and misdeeds are sins of omission. I like that. But we tend to focus on the sins of commission because they're easy to see, and we can point them out, and we're like, hey, yeah, that's a wrong thing to do. Those are easy. And we don't focus so much on the sins of omission, and I think that's a mistake. And here's why. And it comes down to its next level personal holiness. It's connected directly, actually, to what James says earlier in the text, because if God interrupts your plans because he's got something for you to do, but your plans are so important that you don't drop them to do what he wants you to do, or drop other things off of your schedule to make room for what God wants you to do, friends, that is a sin. Plain and simple. You can sin by doing wrong things. You can sin by not doing right things. Say that again. You can sin by doing wrong things. You can also sin by not doing right things. Does this make sense? Let's get personal then a little bit. What good? What selfless? What right things should you be doing that right now you know you're not? Is there maybe somebody in need in your life, and you can think of it right now, it'll pop right in your head, that you could help provide for, but you're like, I don't know, man. Things are a little bit tight right now, or maybe we'll just, when a little more money comes in, we'll find a way to do it then. But instead of providing, you come up then with excuses, just reasons, and why not? Friends, that's a sin. Maybe someone you know is going through a difficult time, and they could really use some encouragement and just a day out with you, or an afternoon spent just having great conversation, and you know that they're really struggling, but every time you go to send the text or reach, you know what, no, I got to take care of this, and you just keep putting it off. That is a sin. Has someone you know been crossing a very obvious sin line? Like, you know those behaviors, what they're doing, the things they're saying, how they're operating is wrong, and you know it, and it kind of makes you sick maybe to your stomach when you hear it or see it. But for whatever reason, you never bring it up, you never approach it, you never confront them, you never challenge them on it in a loving way. That is a sin. By not doing, you are doing something wrong. Or maybe your great sin of omission is ignoring the Great Commission. It's probably the greatest, to be honest, sin of omission that exists. All around you and me, there are people that don't know Jesus, neighbors, family members, people at work, people at school, and they're lost. And if Christ were to come back today, they would die without hope. They would die not knowing Jesus. And the things that would happen to them, the place they would go, the life they would live outside, separated from God, the thing, they're just, it's too painful to even talk about those things. Yet for whatever reason, you just keep your mouth shut. It's not cool to talk about that at school, or I don't want to make waves at work, or I don't want to sound preachy, or be like, that Jesus guy, none of those things. And so ignoring the Great Commission may be the greatest sin of omission of all. Anyone who knows the good they ought to do it and doesn't do it sins. Let God blow up your plans so that this can take place in your life, create margin, create space for that to happen. I'm going to have the band come up at this time. And because I want to take a couple minutes, and in a moment I'm going to read a poem written by Margaret Sangster, and it's on this idea of sins of omission. And you received like a note card maybe, and you grab one of the pencils, and if you didn't, just put up your hand and we'll get one to you. But what I want to do is this. Travis needs one over there. Thank you, Uncle. What I want to do is this, and I'm going to have the band just kind of play a little bit before we sing, and we're going to sing after that. Do you need one? Over here? Yeah, Uncle, look at that. Go around this way. Or, yeah, just run. Do it. Uncle, what a servant, man. What I'm going to have you do as I read the poem, and then we just kind of think for a minute, and we pray for a minute, and we have a time between us and God for a minute, is, what do I know I need to do that I'm not doing? And I want you to, whatever it is, whatever pops in your head, whatever you know, this is the right thing to do. God, I know I need to be doing this. And I've avoided that conversation. I know I need to do this. I've avoided that investment. I know I need to do this, but I've avoided that confrontation. Whatever it is, I just want you to write it down. You're not going to give it to anybody. You're not going to give it to me, all right? This is for you, because sometimes it helps to write things down and look at them. And then I want you to commit Today I will do this. Today I will start this. Margaret Sangster, I love this little poem, said, "It isn't the thing you do, it's the thing you leave undone, which gives you a bit of heartache at the setting of the sun. The tender word forgotten, the letter you did not write, the flowers you might have sent are your haunting ghosts tonight. The stone you might have lifted out of a brother's way, the bit of heartsome counsel you were hurried too much to say, the loving touch of the hand, the gentle, winsome tone that you had no time or thought for, with troubles enough of your own, the little acts of kindness so easily out of mind, those chances to be helpful which everyone may find. No, it's not the things you do, it's the thing you leave undone, which gives you the bit of heartache at the setting of the sun."